Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel ANIN.EDUCATION. Before we start, don't forget subscribe, like, comment, and share. Right now, we learn about how about United States of America or USA, also known as United States or America, as the country primarily locations in North America. It is the Republic of 50 states and the Federal Capital District, Washington DC. The 48 continuous state borders Canada to the north and Mexico to the south, with the semi-exclave of Alaska in the northwest and the archipelago of Hawaii in the Pacific Oceans. The United States also assert sovereignty over five major island territories and the various uninhabited islands in the ocean and the Caribbean. It is mega-desert country with the world's third largest and the area. Etymology. The etymology of the term United States and the initialism US use the noun and the objective in English are a common source name for the country. The initialisms use a noun is the common. United States are the established term towards the US federal government with precise rules and the state in the established colloquial shortening and the name used particular from abroad. State, state size is the corresponding objective and adverb. America is phoneme form for the first word and Americus Festus in the Latin name it is Italy Explorer America Vesperger. It is first used in the place name by Germany cartographer Martin and materials remain in the 1507. History. Ingredients people. The first inhabitants of the North America migrated from the Siberia over 11,000 years ago, either across in the Bering and the British or along in the number of Ice Age and the crosswords which appear around 1100 and believed to be the first white side culture in America. Over time, increased North America culture grew, increasing sophisticated and some such as Mississippian culture, development agriculture cultures, and the complex societies, and was a great period in the missing cultures were locations in the Midwestern, Eastern, and Southern regions, and the Algonquian in the Great Lake regions and long in the Earth's seaboard, while the Hokoman culture and ancestors Pubes inhabited in the southwest. Native population's estimate of the was is now the United States before arrival in Europe. Immigrants range from around 15,000 in nearly 10 million. Europe explorations, colonizations, and conflict. And the Christopher Columbus began exploring the Caribbean for the Spain in the 1492, leading for the Spanish-speaking the settlement and the missing from the Puerto Rico and Florida to the Mexico and California. The first Spanish colony in the what is now the continental United States was the Spanish Florida. After several settlements, filed there to the hunger and the desert, Spain's first permanent town, Saint Augustine, was founded in the 1565. France established its own settlement in French Florida in the 1462, but they were either abandoned colonial of the destroyed by Spanish raid. American revolutions and the Neo-Republic. Following their victory in the France and the Indian War, Britain began the asserts gathered control over locations colonial aware, resulting in the colonial political resistance on one the primary colonial grievers was the denial of the right in the Englishmen, particularly the right in the presentations in the British government that taxed them to demonstrate their distractions resolved the First Continental Congress met in 1774 and passed the Continental Association's a colonial boycott of British goods that provide effective and then including liberty in liberal individual right and the sovereignty of the people, supporting republicanisms of the monarchy, aristocracy, and the hereditary political power, civil virtue, and the privileges for politic corporation. Western expansion and civil war in the late 18th century, American settlers began to expand westward in a large number, many with the sense of the manifest destiny. The Louisiana Purchase of the 1803 from the French nearly double and the territory of the United States. The Missouri comprises of the 1820, which admitted Missouri as a slave state and the Maine as the free states attempt to balance the deserve of the northern states of the revenge, the expansions, the slavers into the terrorists with the dead southern states and the accent is there. Primarily in the compromise provisions slavery in the all others land and Louis's purchase north in the 36 derajat parallel, the United States annexes in the Republics of Texas in the 1845 and the 1846 Allegiance 30 led to U.S. control in the present-day American Northwest. During the colonial period, slavery had been legal and the Americans colonial becoming on the main labor force on the large scale agriculture's dependent economic of the source colonial from the Maryland and the Georgia, the particles began to be significantly questioned during the American Revolutions and the speaker by the active abolitionist movement that the arrangement in the 1930 cities in the north annexes law the prohibited slaves within their boundaries at the time. Reconstruction's Gilded Age and the Progressive Era. Efforts toward reconstructions in the second source had begun as the early in the 1862, but it was only of the President Lincoln associations that the three reconstructions amendment to the constitutions were the ratified and the protect civil rights. The amendment codified nationalities of the obligations of the slavery and the involuntary servitors except the punishment for the crimes. Promise equal protections under the law for all persons and the prohibits discriminations of the basic of race and previous as limit. World War One, Great Depressions, and the World War Two, and the United States entered World War One alongside in the Allies in the 1917, helping to turn the tide against the Central Powers in the 1920. A constitutional amendment granted nationwide women suffrage. During the 1920s and the 1930s, radio for mass communications and the early television transformations communication natural wide. Initially neutral during World War II, the U.S. began supplying war the material of the Allies in the World War II in the March 1941 and enters the war in the December after the Empire of Japan attack in the Pearl Harbor. The US development of the first nuclear weapon used them against in the Japanese cities of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, ending the war. The United States was the of the four policemen who made the plan, the fast forwards alongside Indonesia's kingdom, the Soviet Union, and China. World War and social revolutions. The end of the World War II in the 1945 left the US and the Uni Soviets superpower, each with their own political, military, and economic sphere of the influence. Geopolitical tensions between the two superpowers soon led to the Cold War. The US united the policy of the countermeasure to limit in the USSR and the spare in influence agents and the regime changed against government perceptions for the aligned with the Moscow and rivals in the space race, which culminates with the first Clown Mound landing in the 1969. The counterculture movement in the US brought significantly social changes, including the liberalizations of the attitude towards reacting drug use and sexuality. It also encouraged open devices of the military drug, leading to the end of the conscriptions in the 1973 and the war oppositions to U.S. interventions in Vietnam, with the U.S. totally withdrawing in the 1975. A society shift in the roles of women was significantly responsibility for the large increase the female paid labor participation during 1970, and by 1985, the majority of American women aged 16 and older were employed. Contemporary 1991 until present, in the 1990s saw the largest recorded economic expansions in the American history, a dramatic decline in the U.S. crime rates, and the advance in technology. The source this describe technology innovations such as the World Wide Web, the evolutions of the platinum micros professions in the accordance with Moore law, recreable lithium in the versus the verse, the graphical trial, and the colonial, and was primarily launched in the 1990s with Nasdaq become the first stock market in the United States to do trade online 1998. The US housing bubble culminated in 2007 with the Great Recessions, the large economic contractions since the Great Depressions, coming to a head in the 1960s. In early 1990, political populations in the country increased between rebel and the conservationist faction. These populations, the capital EU on the January 1991 capital attack when the mob of the insurrections entered the US capital and the source prevent the peaceful transfer of the power in the attempt self-jobs decade. Demography. The United States is the world's third largest country by total area behind Russia and Canada. The 48 continuous states and the District of Columbia have the combined area with the square miles, and in 1991 the United States had 8% of the Earth's permanent mid-low of the forces and the 10% of its cropland. Starting the S, the coastal pine, the Atlantic seaboards give way to inland forests and rolling hills in the Piedmont Plateau region. The world's first large ribbon system runs predominantly north-south towards in the center in the country. Climate. Climate in the US with the large size and geographic variety, the United States include most climate types. East of the 100 meridian and the climate range from the humid continental in the north on the Cuban subtropical in the south, the world's great plain in the semi-arid. Many mountains are the American West have a alpine climate that climb in the arid in the southwest. Mediterranean and the coastal California, and the oceanic of the coastal origin Washington and the source Alaska. Most of Alaska subarctic of polar, Hawaii in the source in the US and the terrorists in the Chebricker and the Pacific are tropical. Biodiversity and converse, conservations. The US is one of the 17 mega-diversity country containing a large number and endemic species, about 17,000 species in the first color plant, equal the contiguous United States and Alaska, and over 1,800 species of the flowering plant are found in the Hawaii, few and which occur in the mainland. The U.S. states is the home to 428 mammal species, 718 for birds, 311 reptiles, and 245 amphibians, and around 91,000 insect species. And then Environmental Protection Agency (EPA) is the weather agency charged with to address this most environmental related issue. The idea in the wilderness have the management of the public land since 1964 with the Wilderness Act in the Endangered Species Act the 1973 provides a way for the protect threatened and the endangered species and their habitats. The United States will face the Wildlife Service implement and enforce it in the act. Government and politics. The United States of the Federal Republics of 50 states and the Federal Capital District, Washington, D.C., the U.S. asserts sovereignty over five unincorporated territories and several uninhabited island possessions. National governments. President of United States is Donald Trump and Vice President of the United States J.D. Vance. Composite of the three branches of the headquarters in the Washington, D.C., the federal government is the national governor of the United States is regulated by a strong system of checks and balances. The U.S. Congress is the bicameral legislature met in the Senate and the House of the Representatives. The Senate has 100 members, two from each state, and elected by the state's voter for the 6-year term. The House of the Representative has the 435 members elected for the 2-year term by the constituency of the congressional district where they are reside. A state legislature reside in the district boundaries, with the constituencies within the states. Every U.S. congressional district is the equivalent populations and the same one representative to Congress. The U.S. President is the head of the state's commanders in the chief in the military, chief executive of the federal government, and has the ability to veto legislative bills from the U.S. Congress before they become law. However, President vetoes can be overridden by a two-thirds supermajority vote in both chambers of Congress. The president appoints the member of the cabinet subject to the Senate's approval and name others officials who administer and enforce federal law and policy through their representative agencies. The president also has clemency power for federal crimes and can issue pardons. Finally, the president has the right to the issue expansive executive orders subject to judicial review and the number of policy area. Candidates from the president campaign with the vice presidential running mate. Both candidates are elected together to the voters together in the presidential elections. Unlike other forces in the American politics, this is technically and includes elections in which the winner will be determined by U.S. electoral college. Therefore, all officials cast by individual electors selected by their state legislature. In practice, however, each of the 40 states chooses a group of the presidential electors who are required by the state's law to confirm the winner of their state's population vote. Each state is allowed two electors plus one additional elector for the each congressional districts in the state, which is effect combines to equal the number of elected officials that the states send to Congress. The U.S. federal judiciary chooses judges that are appointed for the life by the president with the Senate approval, consists primarily of the U.S. Supreme Courts and the U.S. Courts of the Appeal and the U.S. District Court. The lowest level in the federal judiciary is the federal district courts, which decided all cases considered to be under original jurisdiction, such as the federal situations considers law and international subdivisions. The in the U.S. federal system, territories of the uses include America Samoa, Guam, and North Mariana Island, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Residents Residents of the 40 states are governed by their elected states government and by elected local government that are administrative divisions of the states. Map in 326 Indian reservations and the United States 231 recognized Alaska native tribes are not shown. India country is made up to 474 federally recognized tribes and 326 Indian reservations. In the additional in additional of the five major terrorists, the U.S. also asserts sovereignty over the United States minor outlying island in the Pacific Oceans and the Caribbean. The seven in undisputed island without permanent populations are Baker Island, Howland Island, Jarvis Island, Johnston Atoll, Kingman Reef, Midway Atoll, and Palmyra Atoll, U.S. Sovereignty over the unpopulated Bajo Niveau Bank, Navassa Island, Serenia Bank, and Wake Island dispute. Political parties. States and territories by partisan control as the February 2025 Democratic Party. The constitutions in the silent on political parties, however, they are developed independently and the 18th century with the Federalist and Anti-Federalist parties. Since then, the United States has operated as the de facto two-party system, though the parties have changed over time. Since the mid-19th century, the two main national parties have been the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The former is the best filed as relative liberal in its political platform, while the latter the persists in the relative conservations it is platform. Foreign relations. The United States has the established structure in the foreign relations, with the world's second largest diplomatic corps as of 2024. It has permanent members in the United Nations Security Council. The home of the United States headquarters, the United States is member in the G7, G20, and OECD intergovernmental organizations. Almost all countries have embassies in the many have consulate official representative in the country. Likewise, Norway and the countries of the formal diplomatic missions in the United States accept Iran, North Korea, and Bhutan. Thus, Taiwan doesn't have formal diplomatic relations with the US. It is maintained close unofficial relations. The United States regularly supplies Taiwan with the military equipment that divert potential Chinese aggressions. It is geopolitical attentions also touring in the Indo-Pacific when the United States joined in the quadrilateral security dialogue with the Australia, India, and Japan. The United States has specially relationships with the United Kingdom and the strong ties in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines, Japan, Korea, Israel, and the several European Union countries such as France, Italy, Germany, Spain, and Poland. The US worked closely with the NATO allies in the military and national security issues, and with countries in American stores, the Organizations of American States and the United States, Mexico, Canada, trade right arrangement. In the South America, Colombia is the traditionally considered to be closest ally of the United States. Military. The president of the commander in the chief of the United States Armed Force and appoint in the leaders, the secretary of defense and the joining chiefs of the staff, the department of defense with the headquarters at the Pentagon near Washington D.C. Administer five of the six servers branches which are the made up of the U.S. Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, and the Space Force for the Coast Guard and administered by the Department of the Homeland Security in the past time and can be transferred for Department of Navy in the wartime. The United States has the third largest combined armed force in the world, behind the Chinese People Liberty Army and the Indian Armored Force. The military operations about 800 days in the facility aboard and the maintain deployment greater than the 100 active duty personnel in the 45 foreign countries. The United States has the aggregate of the over 40 million interventions science since according between 1940 and 25% according in the post-Cold War era. Law enforcement and criminal justice. There are about 1,800 U.S. policy agencies for the local to national level in the United States. Law in the United States is mainly enforced by local police department and the safe department in the and their municipal and the country jurisdictions. The state police department have authority and their respective states and the federal agencies such as Federal Bureau of Investigations FBI and the U.S. Marshal Service have the national judice and space juries as the potential civil rights, national security, enforcing U.S. federal courts, ruling and the federal laws and the interstate criminal activity. In January 2023, the United States had the sixth highest per capita incarceration rate in the world, 431 people per 100,000 inhabitants, and the largest patients and the jail population in the world with more than 1.9 million people in corrections and the analysts and the World Health Organization's mortality database from the 2010 survey US homicide rate were 7 times higher than in the other high-income countries driven by a gun homicide rate that has 25 times higher. Economy. The height of the developed mixed economy that has been the world's largest nominally since about 1890. It is 2024 gross domestic product GDP of more than 29 trillion USD constitutes over 25% of the nominal global economic output or the 14% at the purchasing power parity PP. From 1983 to 98 US real compounded annual GDP growth was 3.3% compared to the 2.3% which overall for the rest in the G2. Of the world's 500 large companies by the revenue, 136 were headquartered in the US in the 2023, which is the highest number in the country. The US dollar is the currency most used in the international transactions and the world's fourth most reverse currency. Backed by the country dominant economic in the military, the petrodollar system is the large US treasuries market and the link euro dollar. The various country used as their official currency is the other is the in de facto currency. The US has free trade agreement with the several countries, including the USMCA. It's ranked second in the global competitiveness report in the 2019 after Singapore. Although the United States has the reactive a population, a post-industrial level in economic development, and it is often described as the having the surface economy. It is remain major industry power in 2021. The U.S. manufacturing sector has the world's second largest after China. Americans have the highest average household and employee income among OECD member states and the 40 high median household income in 2023 up from 600 in the 2013 with the personal consumptions expenditures of the over 19.5 trillion in the 2023. The US has the heavily customer driven economic in the world's largest customer market in the US rank for the number of the dollar billions and the military. Science and technology. The United States has been leader in the technological innovation since the late 19th century in the scientific research since the mid-20th century. Methods for productions, interchangeable parts in the establishment of the machine tools industry enable to the large-scale manufacturing of U.S. consumer products in the late 19th century. By the early 20th century, factor electricians of the introductions of the assembly line and other labor-saving techniques create the system of the mass productions. In the 20th century, in the United States continues to be one of the world's foremost scientific power. Towards China has the Emirates as the major competitor in the many fields. The US has high research and development expenditures of the many countries and ranks in on the percentage of the GDP in the 2022 and the stats says after China in the country with the second highest number of the published scientific paper. In 2021, the US ranked second also after China in the number of the fashion applications and the third by the trademark and industry design applications after China and Germany according to world's intellectual property indicators. In 2023 and 2024, the United States ranked third after Switzerland and Sweden in the Global Innovations Index in the United States in considering to be the leading country in development of the artificial intelligence technology. In 2023, the United States has ranked the second most technological advanced country in the world after South Korea by Global Finance magazine. Spaceflight. The United States has maintained a space program since the late 1940, beginning with the establishment of the National Aeronaut- Aeronauts and the Space Administration NASA in the 1948 NASA Apollo program, 1961 until 1972 achievement the first crew moon landing with the 1969 Apollo 11 mission in the alignment of the agency's most significant milestone. Other major endeavors by the NASA include the Space Shuttle program, the Foggers program, and the Hubble and the James Disper-Stoller Corps launched in the 1990 and 2021 respectively. The United States private sector dominates the global commercial spaceflight industry. Prominent American spaceflight contractors, including Blue Origin's Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and the SpaceX NASA program have such as commercial crew program, commercial resupply services, commercial lunar pilot service, and the next step have the facilities grow the private sector involvement in the American space flight. Energy. In the 2023, in the United States received approximately 84% in the energy from the fossil fuel, and it is a large source as the energy has the petroleum 38%, following by natural gas 36%, renewable source 9%, coal 9%, and the nuclear power 9%. In the 2022, the United States constitutes about 4% of the world's populations of the consumers around 19% of the world's energy. The US ranks as the second highest emitter of the greenhouse gases behind China. The US is the world's largest producer of the nuclear power. Generations around 30% of the world's nuclear electricity. It's also had the highest number and the nuclear power reactions of the country. From 2024, the US plans to triple its nuclear power capacity by 2040. Transportations in the millions miles 6.5 million kilometers of road network owns almost entirely used by the states and the local governments is the longest in the world. The extensive interstate highway system and connects all major cities and defined mostly by the federal governments, but maintained in the state department of the transportations, supplemented by the state's expressway and some private toll roads. Public transportation in the United States is well developed in the large urban area, notably New York City, San Francisco, Washington D.C., Boston, and the Chicago. Otherwise, coverwise in the generally less extensive than the most other developed countries. The U.S. also have many relative as car dependent locations. The country rail transport network in the longest in the world at the 184 kilometer handles mostly first in the constraint to more passengers centers in the Europe because there are even privately owned operations US railroads like began choose the rest as the words in the term and the electrifications. The country's inland waterways are the world's 5 kilometers, totaling 45.009 kilometers. They are used extensively for the freight, recreations, and small amount of the passenger traffic. Of the world's 40 business constraint ports for the locations and the United States, with the base and the US being the ports of Los Angeles. Demographical population. The 10 most population US states 2024 estimate. California 39.4, Texas 31.3, Florida 23.4, New York 19.9, Pennsylvania 13.1, Illinois 12.7, Ohio 11.0, 9. Georgia 11.2, Carolina 11.0, Michigan 10.0. The United States has the diverse populations, 37, and Kirsty's group have the more than 1 million member, where the Americans with the answer 3 from the Europe, the Middle East of the North Africa from the large radial and ethnic group at the 47.8% and the United States populations. Hispanic and the Latinx America from the second largest group and are the 18.7% of the United States populations. African American constitutes the country's third largest and third three from the are the 12.1% of the total US populations. Asian Americans are the country for the largest group composing 5.9% of the United States populations. The country the country's 3.7 million Native Americans according for the about 1% and some 574 native tribes of the recognitions by the federal government in 2024. The median age in the United States population was the 39.1 years. Language. While many languages are spoken in the United States, English is by far the most commonly spoken and written in the 2024 executive orders. Declarations English in the official language of the United States and federal agencies recognize English as the official language of the others. However, Congress has never passed a bill to the designed English in the official language of the three federal branches. Some laws such as U.S. naturalization requirement, nonetheless, standard relations, English 28 states and the United States Virgin Islands have the law and the designated English and the sole official language. 19 states and the District of the Columbia have no official language. According to the American Community Survey 2020, some 245.4 million people in the US, age 5 and the others spoke only English at the home. About 41.2 million spoke Spanish at the home, making it the second most commonly used language. Other languages spoken at the home by millions people or more include Chinese 3.40 million, Tagalog 1.71 million, Vietnam's 1.42 million, Arabic 1.39 million, French 1.18 million, Korean 1.07 million, and Russians 1.04 million. German spoken by the millions people at the home in the 2010 fell to 847 total speakers in the 2022. Immigrations. American immigration population is the by far the world's largest in the absolute term. In the 2022, there were 87.7 million immigrants and the US-born children in the immigrations in the United States, according for nearly 77% of the overall US populations. In 2017, out of the US foreign-born population, some 45% where our naturalized cities 27%, where for lawful permanent residents 6%, 2.2 million, where temporary lawful resident and 23%, 10.5 million, where are unauthorized immigrant. In fiscal years 2024 alone, according to the Migration Policy Institute, the United States resettled 134 refugees, which the resettlement in the United States role as the top global resettlement destinations for suppressions other major resettlement countries in Europe and Canada. Religions. Religious affiliation in U.S. according to Gallup poll is the Protestant 33%, Catholicism and 44 20%, non-specific Christian 11%, Judaism 2%, Mormons 1%, other regions 6%, unaffiliated 22%, unsweared 3%. The First Amendment guarantees the free exercise in the regions in the country of the forbidden Congress from the passing law respecting is the establishment. The overwhelming majority in the Americans believe in the high power or spiritual force and the spiritual practice such as prayer and the considered termless religions of the spiritual in the short-term United States billboards. Urbanizations. About 82% of Americans live in the urban area, including suburbs. About half of the Jews reside in the cities with populations over 30,000 in 2022, 3033 in corporations, municipalities, and the populations over 900,000, nine cities, and had more than 1 million residents, and the four cities, New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and the Houston, had the population exceeds 2 million. Many U.S. metropolitan populations are growing rapidly, particularly in the South and North and South and the West. Health, according to the Center for the Disease Control as the Prevention CDC, average Americans' life expectancy at birth was 78.4 years in 2023, 75.8 years for the men and the 81.1 years from the woman. This was a gain for the 0.9 years from the 77.4 years in the 2022, and the CDC notes that the new average heart rate driven by the decrease in the mortality due to the COVID-19 heart disease, intentional injuries, cancer, and the diabetes starting in the 1998 life expectancy in the US, the behind that the others well industry countries and the Americans health in the disadvantage have the get increased science over science. Educations, American primary and educations, some 77% of American college students attend public institutions such as the University of Virginia and the school system of the operated by the state territorial and sometimes municipal government and the regulations by the U.S. Department of the Education. In general, children in the required to attend school of the upright homeschool from the age of the 5 or 6. Culture and society. Literature. Colonial Americans authors were influenced by the John Lake and other Enlightenment philosopher and American Revolution's period is notable for the political writing in the Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Paine, and Thomas Jefferson. Shortly before and after the Revolution's War, the newspaper rose to the prominence, filing and the demand for the anti-British nationalist literature. An early novel is the William Hill Brown and the Power of the Sympathy, published in the 1791, written and critic John Neal in the early to the mid-19th century helped advance America toward in the unique literature and culture by the critic predecessors as a Washington I for the imitation the British counterpart and by influences writers such as Edgar Allan Poe, who took American poetry and short fictions in the new directions. The conflict surrounding abolitions inspired records like Harvard Baker's Tours and the author of the slave narrative such as Frederick The Last Nathaniel Hawthorne and the Scarlet Letter explores the dark side of the American history as the did Herman Melville's Moby Dick, Major American Sports, and other as literally writes Ross periodical publishes more the stories centers around industry workers, women, and the rural poor. Mass media. Media in the United States is broadly uncensored with the First Amendment, providing significant protections at the authorities in the New York Times, CEO, United States. The four major broadcasters in the U.S. are National Sports Times Company (NBC), Columbia Broadcasting System (CBC), and American Broadcasting Company (ABC), and Fox Broadcasting Company (FOX). The four major broadcasting television networks are all commercial entities. The United Cable Nation television system offers hundreds of the channels catering to the variety of United. In the 2021, about 83% of Americans over age 12 listening to the broadcast radio, while about 40% listening to the podcast. In the prior year, there were licensed full powers radio stations in the U.S. according to the Federal Communications Commission (FCC). And theater, the United States is well known for the S theater, mainstream theater in the United States. Derives from the old European theatrical traditions as the heavily influenced by the British theaters. By the middle of the 19th century, America had to create new district dramatic from the Tom Shows and the Showboard Theater and the minstrel show. Field tour arts. Folk arts in the colonial America grew out of the artisanal craftsmanship in the communities that allow commonly trained people and individually express themselves. It was distinct from the Europe traditions in the high arts, which was the less established and generally less relevant to the early American settlers. Cultural movement in the arts and the craftsmanship in the colonial America generally lagged behind. Choose the words Europe from the example, prevailing medieval style in the woodworking and the primitive sculpture become integral in the early American folk art. Music. American folk music encompasses numerous music genres, various known in the traditional music, traditional folk music, contemporary pop music, and or rock music. Many traditional songs have been sung within the same family or folk group and the generations and sometimes trade back such as original in the British Isles, Minor Europe, or Africa. Fashion. The United States has the world's largest apparel market by revenue, apart from the professional business attire. American fashion is the electric and the predominantly informal American diverse cultural roots are the reflexes in their clothes. However, sneakers, jeans, streets, and the baseball cap are the emblematics of American style. New York with this Fashion Week is considered by one in the Big Four global fashion capital along with the Paris, Milan, and London. A study demonstrates that the general proximities to the Manhattan garments district. Cinema. The U.S. industry has the worldwide influence in the volume Hollywood, districts in the northwest Los Angeles and the nation's second most popular city is also metonymous for the American filmmaking industry. The major film studios as the United States are the primary source as the most commercially successful movies selling in the most market and the world. Cuisine. Early settlers were introduced by Native Americans to food such as turkey, sweet potatoes, corn, squash, and the maple syrup. of the most enduring, the pervasive example are variations of the native discs, Sukotas, early settlers, and the larger immigrants combined deaths with foods there were familiar such as wheat flour, beef, and milk to create a distinct Native American. Sport. The most popular spectator sport in the US American football, basketball, baseball, soccer, and the ice hockey. While most major US sports such as baseball and American football have the anchors out in Europe, practices baseball, volley, skateboarding, and snowboarding are the American inventions, which have become popular worldwide. Let's go first in the surfing around from the Native American and the Native Hawaiian activities that predicts Europe contract. Thank you everyone for watching. Don't forget subscribe, like, comment, and share. And see you to next video. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.